Hello there. Today, let's talk about basic firearm safety. Now, basic firearm safety is something that is universal. It doesn't matter what language you speak, what race you are, what gender you are, what age you are. Everybody should know basic firearm safety. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who disregard it and a lot of people who are ignorant towards it. Or there's some people who refuse to hold a firearm because they think the gun might possibly go off, and they refuse to learn basic firearm safety. And I do want to change that. Now, I don't know how long this video is going to be. This is the first shot, but if you have the attention span of a peanut, the basic takeaway is keep your finger off the trigger if you're not ready to shoot. Know your target and what's behind it. Don't point your gun at something you don't wish to destroy, and treat every firearm as if it was loaded. And with that being said, I want to make a long video going over the different avenues of firearm safety, because different situations will call for different procedures of firearm safety. And yeah, without further ado, let's begin. Now, when it comes to handgun safety, in this portion, I'll be talking about loading and unloading your handgun, and it's all actually pretty simple. Now, before I begin, I want to demonstrate that this gun is indeed safe. So first, there's nothing in the magazine, right? So we have an empty mag, and then I'll open up the chamber of the gun, and without pointing the barrel of the gun on me, you'll see that this gun is indeed empty. And what I can do is I can rack it a couple times, point it in a safe direction, pull the trigger, and know that this gun is indeed safe. So if I was to go about loading this gun, let's say for concealed carrying, what I would first do is I would take the firearm and inspect that there's no existing round in the chamber. Once I establish that, I am going to take my loaded magazine. I'm going to physically tell myself, mag in. I kind of like to build certain firearm habits, and so whenever I'm loading a firearm, I want to be conscious of my actions. So I'll literally say, like, to myself, mag in, finger off the trigger, and then I'll load it and stuff like that. So first, mag in. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the trigger well, and I'm going to physically tell myself, finger off the trigger well. Keep my eyes on that trigger well, and the trigger well is right here. And I'm going to rack the gun and make sure that my trigger finger is always off the trigger, and then I'll put it into like the holster or wherever I'm going to put it. And so that's how I would go about loading a firearm safely. And to unload the gun, what I would do is basically the reverse steps. I would take the magazine out. Next, what I'm going to do is, with my finger off the trigger, I'm going to rack that existing round. I'm going to look down the chamber, make sure there's no round in that chamber. Next, I'm going to rack it a couple times, point in a safe direction, pull the trigger, and have a dead trigger and a safe gun. So that's how I would go about loading and unloading a handgun. And all the fundamentals are basically the same when it comes to revolvers, semi-automatic pistols. It's all the same, like, basic fundamentals, and even with rifles, it's all the same thing, okay? As far as safety with the rifles, it's the same exact things with handgun safeties. Always keep your finger off the trigger, don't point at anybody you don't intend to shoot, and, you know, treat it as if it was loaded. And the way I would go about loading a rifle is, first I'm going to examine that this rifle is indeed clear, and then you can look down the chamber if you guys want. So you can see there's no round in there. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my magazine, and with my finger off the trigger, I'm going to put or insert my magazine in here, and then with my finger off the trigger, again, rack it. And if I'm not ready to shoot, I'll put it on safe, and I'll show you guys again. So to put the AK on safe, just like that, and there you have it. And whenever I'm ready to shoot, I'll flick it down and then shoot. Now, if I want to remove the magazine safely, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the magazine out. I'm going to look into the chamber, know that there's nothing in there, rack it a couple times, and then point it in a safe direction, click, have a dead trigger, put it on safe, and you're good to go. So that's basically how you load and unload like any sort of rifle, and it's not AK exclusive. This can apply to a SCAR, an AR-15, and a Steyr AUG. It doesn't matter. All the fundamentals are the same, okay? And yeah, that's basically the kind of fundamentals with gun safety. It's all very universal. Doesn't matter what platform it is, you know, as long as you safely unload, load the gun, you should be good to go. When it comes to group events, this is where things might get a little bit sticky, but fear not. If you watch this portion of the video, you should be generally okay when it comes to group events. So if you're in a crowd with a lot of people and they might ask, oh, can I look at your gun? First thing you should do is unload the gun, because you should never pass a person a loaded firearm. So what I like to do is take the magazine out, and then rack out the existing round, look inside the chamber, make sure there's no round in the chamber, rack it a couple times, point in a safe direction, pull the trigger, know that you have a dead trigger and thus a dead gun. And you can hand it to another person, but the way you hand it to a person does matter as well. You want to make sure you don't muzzle yourself, you don't point the barrel to yourself or to another person, so keep it to the ground, point it more or less like this, and keep your finger off the trigger, and then have them pick it up. Or better yet, set it down on the table and let them pick it up. But just because they're holding the gun, you're still responsible for that gun. So you want to be very cognizant of all the actions of that person. Make sure they're not pointing it at another person. Make sure their finger is off the trigger. Make sure they're being as responsible as you are with your firearm, because at the end of the day, it is your gun and you are absolutely responsible for the actions of this gun, okay? So just be very cognizant of how that person handles the gun and where that gun ends up. And make sure ultimately that gun comes back to you in one piece and everybody's okay. Another issue when it comes to a lot of group events is flagging. And what I mean by flagging is whenever you point the barrel of the gun or the muzzle of a gun at another person, okay? And this is a very easy fix, and unfortunately a very easy thing to get wrong. And so to avoid flagging, okay, all you have to do is just keep the barrel pointed down if you're going to be sweeping, or point up. But it's a lot better to keep the muzzle of the gun pointed down if you're going to be doing any sort of moving, or if there's a lot of people like around you. Now, if I have a cameraman, or if you're shooting any sort of YouTube videos, right now this is a one-man crew. Again, you don't want to be flagging them if you're going to be presenting a gun, but rather you want to do something more along the lines of this. So if you're presenting a gun, you want to kind of flip it down just like this, keeping your finger off the trigger, or you can go from up and just like that without having to flag the barrel at my cameraman. And again, there's nobody behind this camera, it's just a one-man show. But that's basically everything you need to know about group events, and all the same thing applies to rifles as well. I have the AK right here, of course, it is clear, I can see. And you don't want to do any sort of flagging. You want to either keep it pointed up or point it down. And if you're going to be passing the AK around, or even an AR, take the magazine out. Let me see if I have pocket space. And then you're going to want to rack out any rounds just in case. Rack it a couple times to make sure it's clear. And another thing I like to do is, if I'm going to be passing a gun to somebody, I want them to do their own inspection. I want them to watch me rack the gun clear, make sure it's all safe, but I'll also tell them, here's the gun, make sure it's safe too. And so I'll have them like make sure they do their own safety inspection of the gun to make sure it's safe as well. And you know, keep it fun, keep it casual, and yeah, that's all you need to know about guns in groups. Alright, so in this segment, let's talk about actually holstering your gun and wearing your gun itself. Now with this, I'm going to be using my carry piece, and to show that it is indeed unloaded, you guys can look down the chamber. Hopefully it will focus for you guys. So nothing in the gun. I can rack it a couple times, point in the safe direction, click, it is safe. So again, a lot of the fundamentals are exactly the same. But when it comes to drawing and holstering your gun, the main thing you want to take away is keep your finger off the trigger if you're not ready to shoot. That's where a lot of people make mistakes and they go to the hospital for that. And so I will kind of demonstrate it. So hopefully you guys can see. Whenever you're going to draw your pistol, you want to draw and make sure your finger, your index finger or your shooting finger is always off the trigger before you present your gun, okay? Because if your finger was on the trigger, it might go off and that's it for your junk. So you want to make sure and be very cognizant, keep your finger off the trigger when you draw, and then once you present, you can pull that trigger, okay? And it's the same thing whenever you're going to holster your gun. Make sure your finger is always off the trigger whenever you're holstering, and that should save you a lot of hospital trips. And now it doesn't matter what part of your holster is going to be on your body. It could be right side dominant, left side dominant, or appendix. Everything should still apply. Keep your finger off the trigger, present, and then put your finger on the trigger once you're ready to shoot. Okay, so it's all very basic, okay? Let's talk about some basic gun range etiquette. And this goes along the lines of basic gun safety. Now, at the gun range, typically speaking, there's going to be people to the right of you and to the left of you, and you have to be cognizant of them. And because of that, you'll never point your gun to the right or to the left. It doesn't matter, okay? You always keep it pointed downrange. And by downrange, I mean keep the muzzle of your gun pointed towards the target. You're never going to point it to the left wall, to the right wall. It doesn't matter. Always downrange. And that goes for shooting as well. And another thing too is you always want to keep your work area clean. If you have a lot of bags and a lot of junk and magazines and ammos on the floor, you might trip, you might have a loaded gun in your hand and you fall and an accident happens, big oopsies. So always keep your guns and everything else very clean, very organized whenever you're at the range. Now let's say you're done shooting your gun, or you might want your friend to try out your gun and they're at a different lane. You never want to physically transfer your gun with your hand to another part of the range. That is very bad etiquette and very dangerous in most cases. So what you're gonna do first is you're going to unload the gun, make sure it is clear, put it back into its box, close it up, and then you'll transfer it to that other lane, and then your friend or you can open it up and then use the gun at that area. But you never want to transfer your gun, or loaded or unloaded otherwise, to another part of the range just with your hands. You want to make sure it's going to be in a box. Whenever you're getting ready to shoot at the range, you want to make sure your gun is always pointed down range, no matter what. And whenever you're getting ready to reload, you're not going to point up, you're not going to point down, okay? Depending on what kind of range you're at, you might either put a hole in their ceiling or put a hole in their concrete. So you always want to keep your weapon downrange, and I'll allow for just about this much. And you're going to load the magazine. Again, keep it pointed downrange, no matter what you're doing, and then have fun. And once you're out of ammo, what I like to do is I'll take the magazine out, and then I'm going to rack the gun, make sure it's clear, pull the trigger, and then know that it's safe. Then put it on safe, and then I'll set it down, making sure the firearm is always pointed downrange. And this applies to rifles and pistols alike, and that's just basic etiquette. Oh, another thing to note is you should never stand too close to a person who's shooting. You want to make sure you have a decent distance away from the person shooting. A lot of times gun ranges will have like a yellow line or a line where you shouldn't cross, and it's only allowed for one shooter. But if you're too close to a shooter, they might have, I don't know, like a really strong shotgun that they're not used to. It might bump them back, they bump into you, they trip, they still have a loaded gun, and an accident might happen. So you do want to make sure that you stand a decent distance away from your friends who are like shooting a firearm. And it doesn't have to be like that far. I would say maybe 3, 4, or 5 feet away, and then you should generally be okay. But you don't want to be like all up close with your friend while he's shooting, and he might accidentally bump into you, okay? So just, personal space, guys. So if you're shooting with friends, and you're sharing the same lane and you want your friend to try your gun out, you never hand them or personally hand them a loaded firearm. That goes against a lot of rules and basic firearm safeties, but instead what I like to do is I'll have the gun empty. I'll make sure there's nothing in the chamber. I'll have the gun empty, pointed downrange, kept on the table, and the magazine separate. And I'll tell them, okay, you can load it themselves. And then they walk up, they'll pick the gun up themselves, load it, shoot it the way they want to, and then, you know, that's game. But I'll never personally hand them the firearm from one hand to the other. That's where a lot of slip-ups can happen and possibly a trigger might be blown, okay? So, just keep in mind, never hand a friend a loaded firearm. Always keep the firearm on the range table and let them pick it up themselves and have fun. If you're unsure about something at the range, all you have to do is ask, okay? And when it comes to firearm safety and firearm handling, there's no such thing as a stupid question. I would rather you guys stop and ask me 1,000 questions about my firearm than for you to pick up the gun and not know what you're doing, okay? There are no stupid questions when it comes to firearm safety. It doesn't matter whether you're asking how to rack the gun or how to manipulate the safety or how to take the magazine out the gun. Just ask. We are more than willing to help as gun people, and as a gun community, we love helping newcomers kind of figure out their way with firearms for the first time. So, you know, if you don't know something about a gun, please just ask. Never assume something, and let the pros teach you about certain safety procedures or how to use that certain firearms. It will save a lot of people a lot of hassle and potentially a hospital trip. Another thing I want to touch about with basic range safety is you want to make sure that your muzzle or your barrel is always forward of everyone around you. A lot of times somebody might be too far back into their shooting range and they might have people who's actually in front of the muzzle to the sides of you, and that's very not ideal. So you always want to be like very close to your shooting table. Make sure you have the walls dividing you. Make sure no one's in front of you whenever you're shooting. It doesn't matter if they're going to be like off to the right or to the left of you. It really doesn't matter. You want to make sure that everyone's behind you whenever you're pulling that trigger. That way you have the utmost safety at the gun range. Let's talk about the concept of treating a firearm as if it was loaded. Now I'll be talking with my pistol. Now this I already checked that it is unloaded, so there's nothing in the chamber and the magazine's out and clear. You can see no magazine there. However, just because it is safe doesn't mean I'll point it at another living person or something I don't intend to destroy. You always want to treat a firearm as if it was loaded, and you do this because you want to maintain all the fundamentals of basic firearm safety, keeping your finger off the trigger if you're not ready to shoot, and never point the gun at anybody or anything you don't intend to destroy. See, the thing is, I want you guys to be comfortable with the firearm. However, you should never be complacent with the firearm, or you never should be too comfortable with the firearm. That means don't point it at other people, don't wave it around, don't point it at your head, don't pull the trigger and you know, just be responsible of this firearm the entire time that you have it. Doesn't matter if it's loaded or unloaded, you are responsible for the actions of this gun. And so, with that being said, you do want to treat the firearm as it was loaded at all given times. And treat it with the utmost respect, because there is a lot of responsibility that goes into owning a firearm. And that is why I say you always want to treat a firearm as if it was loaded. And that's it. That's everything you need to know, or at least everything that I thought I should teach you guys about basic firearm safety. Now, if you thought that I left something out on this video, do let me know in the comments. I felt as though, you know, I tried to cover as much ground as I possibly could, but I'm sure I probably left something out. So just leave it in the comments and, you know, I'll read everything. And I really do appreciate you guys for watching this video. If you watched till this very end, I love you guys. And you know, I know this video is not necessarily like the flashiest thing ever. I don't have the best editing skills, and I'm not very good with kind of like this whole filming thing. I'm still kind of just getting used to it. However, I do hope you found this very educational and very informative and fun to watch for you guys. And hopefully I taught some newcomers or new time gun owners or even veteran gun owners some possible gun safety tips that you guys can apply to your daily lives. If you enjoy this kind of content, be sure to give me a subscription. That's the best way to support me. And yeah guys, stay safe with your firearms and have a good day.